once you're bound up, you can test out where your switches do. We have them all listed here for you. So all the switches on the radio are indicated by letters. So you have SA, SB, SC, SD. We got them listed right here, and it tells you what each one's assigned to. The default position for all your switches is up and away from you. So you always want to start with the front two up and then these away. Every switch is just going to be the opposite of that. So to arm it, it's SA, you're going to pull it towards you. And then flick it away to disarm. That's the way I like to think of it, is it's going bad, get it away from me. Just push it away and disarm. The only other switch that you're gonna actually see what it's doing while it's on the bench is gonna be switch SD, that's your beeper. So pull that one towards you. Again, this is how you're gonna find it when you crash in the field and you're just lost. You don't know where you're at. While I mentioned that, it's also a good idea, make sure to strap this connection down well. So you want your battery straps to hold that, because the difference between finding your drone when it's plugged in and not plugged in, it's huge. When you can do this, piece of cake. Listen for the beep, go find it. If you don't got that, it's tricky. The beeper's only going to work if the battery's plugged in. You got beep, that comes unplugged. When you got all your stuff on the bench like this and you want to test out your switches and everything, you can't have the props on. That's rule number one. In general, these things aren't too dangerous if you're pretty careful, but if it hits you and it's going full throttle, it'll slice you up. So always, always, always take the props off when you have things anywhere other than you're about to fly it. Okay, so we can check the arming switch. This is the number one question and concern that I get. I get calls all the time about this. People say, well, I armed it, and then when I give it some throttle, it's acting like it wants to just take off on me. On the bench, that's completely normal for that to do that. It's just because of the way that the gyro is meant to work. Is it's supposed to be suspended in the air. When it's sitting on the ground, it's just building up this error. So long story short, don't be concerned about that. It's not going to run away in the sky when you put props on it. If for whatever reason something crazy does happen and you're just gaining altitude and you're not giving it any throttle, just disarm. Just let it fall. It's always better once you've gotten past the point that you don't have control anymore to just let it fall out of the sky than to try to bring it back, because sometimes it's just going to end up getting further away from you, and you shouldn't be flying anywhere where if it were to fall at any given time, it's going to be a problem anyways. Another thing you can test out on the bench is how turtle mode works. So turtle mode is going to be on your SC switch. You flick that down, and when you arm it, nothing's going to happen. But if I were to give it some roll, you're going to notice only two motors are spinning, and they spin the opposite way. So you're going to get flipped over, you're going to disarm. Now don't forget to get back out of turtle mode. I've done this before where I crash and then I go to arm, I'm like, I can't go anywhere. It's because you're still in turtle mode. So now you got to flick out of turtle mode. Now you're back to normal operation. So there's one more switch, but there's not really any way for me to show you what it does on the bench, and that's SB. So that switch is going to put you into auto level. What auto level is for is it's going to make the drone perform more like a phantom, where when you push the stick, it'll move forward, but as soon as you let off, it's going to level back off for you. It's not going to be as stable because there's no GPS, but it can really help for when you're not used to the sticks yet to just be able to let off, and it's going to flatten out for you. But we don't really recommend to stay there too long, because in the end, you're going to be able to fly a lot better when you have full control over the drone. There's only one last thing to do before we take this thing for a test flight. You got to put your props on. So hopefully, along with your purchase, you have bought a prop tool, or you have a tool. It's just an 8mm nut driver. You might have something in the garage. If not, just pick one up from the store. You want to make sure these are nice and snug, though. If they come loose on you, it's gonna get bad. How do you know which way they go? Well, the first thing to make sure is that you have it right side up. I've seen people put their props on upside down, so don't be ashamed if you did it, because it happens. Just about every prop that I've ever seen, it has what model of prop it is molded right onto it. And that's always gonna be on the top side. The other way you can kind of tell is pretty much every prop, every blade of every prop, it's got a little bit of curve to it. So you always want it curving this way, not this way. The leading edge of the blade is always gonna be the higher one. So if you're ever a kid and you're driving, you stuck your hand out the window, you kind of notice when you put the front of it up, it makes your hand wanna go up. Same concept with this. So leading edge is higher, and also there's almost always a swoop to the edge of the blade. Swoop, going that way. That means the prop's going this way. Every set of props, provided they didn't screw up and give you the wrong ones, you're gonna have 2 pairs. There's gonna be 2 that are the same, and then 2 that are the opposite way. The ones that are the same go on opposite corners.
So the way that most drones are set up is for the props to spin inward, where the front 2 props spin toward the camera, the back 2 props spin towards the antennas. You can think of the drone as giving you a hug with them props. But some specific builds we've found there's an advantage to having it go the other way. So our
Cinewa build is a props out build. So
it's swimming.
Yeah,
just keep swimming. Just keep swimming.
The front motors go in towards the camera. The back motors go in towards the butt. So if I look at this prop, I know that it's swooping this way. This is meant to spin that way. So that's gonna go over here. Leading edge of the blade is higher, and the profile of the blade sweeps back. So I take the one that's a pair of that, it's the same, goes opposite corner. And now the thinking's done. You only got 2 props left, and you only got 2 motors left. You can't get wrong. And then you wanna snug those babies down. Don't be shy about getting these nice and tight. I've also had some customers have issues. They're like, my quad sounds weird, it doesn't have any power, and what it is if you don't tighten these down enough, when you punch the throttle hard, it can actually slip underneath of that nut and spin freely, and you don't want that. Just nice and snug. You shouldn't be able to hold the motor and turn the prop at all. It should be in there nice. And when you're tightening these up, you wanna find a good grip to where you can kinda hold the motor. So what I do is I usually take a blade and I hold right over that, and then I know that as I'm turning it, it's gonna wanna turn, so I'm kind of gripping onto the blade and the motor at the same time. Just go till, hand tight, and then give it one little, and that should do it. Props are on, plugged in, got the radio there. What you need to understand is as soon as you touch that switch, you're live. I've seen this happen to people where either A, they go to pick everything up and they bump it, or you've already landed and you go to pick it up off the ground and you bump it. You need to treat this kind of like a loaded weapon. It's ready to go at any time. So just remember, I'll press the opposite way to like keep it disarmed. I'll like keep pressure on that switch as I'm walking around. You want to really make sure you don't hit that switch.
We definitely recommend doing this test hover line of sight. That means you're not actually in the goggles yet. I know you want to get flying FPV. You're excited. Don't go full throttle yet. In fact, don't go any throttle yet.
Right.
What I like to do,
make sure your directions are going the right way, right?
And they should, because we've set it up, but maybe you got it from somewhere else, and maybe you should just be careful.
It's just good practice, and it's also a safe way to test that you put the props on right.
That too. On the right stick, you're gonna gently push forward, and even without raising throttle, that should lift the tail of the drone up. And then you're gonna let go of the stick back to center, and it'll come back to the ground, and then you can do that for every direction.
If you're really new, just do like little bunny hops. And this is also gonna help you practice landing. Just take off, try to move forward a couple feet and land it. Take off, go to the side, land it. So when you're hovering, I'm only ever moving the stick about that much. There's not gonna be a lot going on in a hover. The only time you really ever need to pull the stick that much is if you're gonna do a full flipper roll. So what a lot of times beginners will do is they'll overcorrect, and then they'll kind of get nervous and overcorrect again, and you just get this like, whoa. That's what'll happen if you give it too much. So it's really subtle movements. Like if you can see my thumbs, I'm just barely moving it. Even though it may seem like a hover is a super simple thing to do, it's actually not easy to hover a quad right in one spot. So if you can't do it, that's normal. Almost nobody can keep it planted as well as a DJI drone will do. But it's a really good practice, because if you can keep it in relatively small space, that's gonna teach you really good stick control for when you're out flying FPV. You're not just getting all over the place. It gives you a feeling for how much stick movement translates to how much drone movement.